All right, so in this video, I'm gonna walk you through how I painted this still life from life. I'm gonna talk about why I wanted to do this, how I created a shadow box to set up my still life, how I set up my still life, talk about lighting and composition, and then step by step how I painted it. All right, welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify oil painting so that you can get better faster. So I really enjoy painting from life. The time when I get the most practice painting from life is when I go out and plein air paint. But I haven't been able to do that much recently because where I live here in Florida, it is so hot. It makes painting landscapes outside pretty brutal. Also, we have like thunderstorms every single afternoon. So I wanted a way to paint from life daily. So I thought it'd be a smart idea to construct a shadow box for a still life so I can easily, whenever I want, just throw some things in there and paint a still life. I've talked a lot about this before, about the importance of getting rid of resistance to painting. I'm sure a lot of you can relate that a lot of times you want to paint, but then you see your dirty brushes that you have to clean, your palette that you have to clean, you don't know what you want to paint, you have to look up a picture, you have to set up a still life, and before you know it, you spent an hour just setting up before you start painting. Now there's a great book called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, and he calls stuff like that resistance. It's things keeping you from doing what you should be doing, which is painting. So I created a shadow box. I went to local hardware store. I got a big piece of wood. I don't know what kind of wood it was. One side it was white, almost like a dry erase board, and the other side was actually black, which was perfect because I was like, oh, I was gonna need to paint the inside of my shadow box black, but this is already painted. Perfect. And so I got someone at the store to cut it for me. Then I got some hinges, screwed those in to connect these three pieces so they can move. Then I got my music stand, which is nice because it can adjust to a good height. Put a piece of foam board on top of that as a base. And then I put my 3-panel shadow box on top of that. Laid down a white cloth, put a vase with some flowers, some fake grapes, and an orange. Now, when it comes to lighting, I put one light directly overhead. When it comes to lighting, you're just gonna have to experiment and figure out what you want. I always try just to have one light source on the subject because that's gonna create the most distinct light and shadow shapes. And when I'm lighting, I'm looking for areas of high contrast, meaning dark shapes right next to light shapes. For example, the top of these flowers here are pretty bright. So I actually used another piece of foam board to put on top of my shadow box to block out some light to make the background right behind these flowers darker. That way I have the light shape of these flowers right next to the dark shape of the background. Always look to kind of flag the light with a piece of board or something to create interesting dynamic shadows and patterns of light and dark. Another good example of this is the top of the orange. It's really bright, got the light hitting right on it, and it's right in front of a good dark shadow. So that dark shadow and the bright orange are gonna contrast really well. So if you're setting up a still life and you got an object and say like the right side of that object is in shadow, try and make what's behind it a little lighter so you can contrast that shadow with something light, and vice versa with the part of the object that is brighter. Try and make the background behind that bright part darker. And you're always gonna have to like kind of improv and mess around with your lights because the light that I was using to shine on my linen panel was spilling over into my scene. So I kind of had to flag that off with another piece of cardboard. It's not a huge deal if you got like other light coming in there. It's just I use pretty powerful lights to light my panel because I'm filming and I need it to be nice and bright to get good quality video. And a lot of that light spills over into my scene, kind of ruining the lighting look that I wanted. All right, let's talk quickly about composition, kind of what I'm seeing here. First off, got my focal point, which is this orange. Obviously, it's definitely like the brightest and thing drawing the most attention to itself. And I like how the line from the cloth here brings us to it. Also, we have the grapes here that bring us to it. And also these grapes are kind of acting as an end to the painting. It's bringing you into the painting. And also with this, I like this angle that the grapes are at here. I put them at this angle opposed to, putting them on this side of the vase and creating that angle because it's counteracting the angle made up here by the flowers. Whenever you have like an angle like this up top, it's good to kind of counteract it with an angle at the bottom. Then I got this nice diagonal that brings us up to the flowers. My focal point is not in the center and it's looking good. So this is a pretty small little painting, 9x12 linen panel. I put out my colors. I got ultramarine blue, sap green, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, yellow ochre, cadmium lemon, and titanium white. And then, oh, I almost forgot, I also have burnt sienna. I'm just gonna shimmy some of that in right there. All right, I got everything set up. I am ready to start. I am ready to start painting. I start by drawing out my scene with a wash of burnt sienna. That's burnt sienna with a lot of paint thinner. Once I do that, I like to start with the darks, and I lay those in with thin paint. Now I want to point this out that you can see that there's 3 different subjects happening in the shadows here. We've got the vase, the flowers, and the background. 3 different things, but in the shadows, they all kind of form this one dark mass. I really encourage you to look for areas like this to lose edges. You know, we lose the edges between these 3 objects, and that's fine. That actually makes things more interesting, and it'll make areas where you do define the edges more interesting if you have lost edges like this. So if you're looking at a scene and it's hard to tell where something ends and another begins, and you lose where the edges are, lose it in the painting. It'll make it that much more interesting. In fact, even enhance it a little more if you want to in certain areas. Use your artistic license to make things more interesting and to push what you are seeing. This is one of the advantages of painting from life opposed to a photograph. You're going to be able to see things like this a lot easier. So don't waste it and incorporate it in your painting. Also note at the beginning here, everything is very loose. I'm not trying to paint everything exactly. I'm kind of taking notes on certain areas, color notes, value notes. I mean, look at this orange. It's only 2 colors and the shape isn't even really the shape of an orange, but you know it's an orange. Your painting's gonna naturally get tighter as you work on it. So now is the time to be loose and expressive. All right, now these flowers, a lot of people find things like this difficult. If you struggle with painting trees and leaves and everything, pay close attention to this because it's the exact same idea. At first, I just want to find the overall form of the flowers. I want to think about the flowers not as a bunch of individual petals, but kind of what it would look like if I draped a cloth all around it. And I want to block that in with just 2 values, a light and a dark. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm also using my brushwork slightly to indicate a little bit of a texture here, but my main focus is just figuring out the overall form of the flowers and how the light's hitting it, where are the lights and where are the darks. I'm not worried about individual petals or little areas of light and dark, just big shapes. I'll come back to these flowers and show you how I develop them a little bit later. But now let's go to the grapes, because I'm gonna do a very similar thing, and I'm gonna block out all these grapes with just 1 flat average dark value. Later I'll come back in and add some other values. Now, when I'm working the cloth, I'm not so worried about making this cloth as detailed as possible. I'm more concerned with how it's going to positively affect the subjects. For example, like I was saying earlier with this orange and the bright top of the orange contrasting with the darkness of the background. I want to make sure that I have that contrast and I make that part of the cloth and shadow dark enough. Also, I'm going to put a little more blue into there because blue is orange's complement. So it's going to push the dynamic between the lightness of this orange and then kind of the cool dark blue of the cloth. Now, if you struggle with mixing color, like if I just said complement color and you don't really know what that means, well, I highly suggest checking out the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course, which I've made available to you for free. You can find a link to that in the description below. All right, now that there's paint covering the whole canvas, it's time to really have some fun and go in there and find more subtle, smaller shapes of value and color. You notice that's how I phrased it. I didn't say now it's time to go and to finally detail paint in orange and then finally detail paint in grapes. I'm just thinking about shapes, big to small, and colors and values. And I know if I put the right colors and values and the right shapes next to each other, the forms of these subjects will be developed. With these grapes, they're all one solid color right now. So I'm gonna go in and pick and choose certain areas to put darker darks and lighter lights. I'm also gonna pick and choose which individual grapes I want to develop. I'm not gonna go grape by grape and try and paint every single grape. I'm also gonna use the edges to pick and choose certain areas to define the edge of a single grape. If I use a combination of those things, I can suggest the grapes opposed to going in and trying to paint every single one. You'll be surprised at how little you'll actually need to do to fully suggest something like grapes. I have this exact same strategy when I go back up to the flowers. I'm picking and choosing which areas to indicate individual petals. And while I'm doing that, I'm being very conscious of the form that I laid out earlier. I don't want to overdo it with individual petals or put light petals in areas where there should be shadow and completely lose the form that I established early on. I'm also picking and choosing certain areas to cut out on the edge of the flowers to indicate individual petals. Also, this is a good time to soften edges, where these petals are being lost into the shadows in the back. I run my brush across the petals, kind of blend them a little bit into the background to get those soft edges on petals that are being lost into the darkness. Lost into the darkness. Now it's just a matter of me moving around the painting and working things that I've already established. And bada boom, you have a painting. All right. Hope you found this video helpful. Hopefully it makes you want to paint from life more and go out and make your own shadow box and set up still lifes and paint them and get more practice and get better. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to see what I am painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.